Oh, Kay, thank you so much for spending your time with me. I'm excited for this chat.
Oh, I'm so grateful that I'm here. This is going to be wonderful.
Yes. So I know we've had some chats previously, but why don't you tell us a little bit about your story of your losses? I know you've had a few. So share a little bit about your journey with us.
Sure, absolutely. Well, it started with my father, with his diagnosis of stage 4 skin cancer wrapped around his esophagus. So a very, very unusual place to find it. Even the doctors were a little flummoxed with this. And they never found any other skin cancer on his body. So they called it stage 4 because it wasn't where they expected it to be. And it seemed like it was going to be easy as far as cancer goes, to shrink the tumor and remove it. And he had several friends that had something actually similar to this, and it went really well. So we were optimistic. Shortly after that, my husband was diagnosed with aggressive stage 4 prostate cancer at the age of 43, 7 years before they even start testing or looking for prostate cancer. Shortly after that, my father passed away very suddenly and unexpectedly, sort of from a side effect of the treatments he was receiving. My husband did live another year and a half. Actually almost 2 years, almost 2 years and a month after that, before he lost his battle to cancer. And that was quite the journey, because it was so unexpected and so quick from the time he was suffering pain in his back to within a couple of months of a lot of what's going on, that we thought it was an injury. This isn't healing. The pain's getting worse. To him peeing blood and going to the emergency room, going in for surgery, and discovering that he had a 50% chance of living 5 years.
Wow. I mean, that's a lot of compound grief, obviously, because you have all of this with your dad and then losing your dad, then the diagnosis with your husband and the rapid, I can't even imagine what that would have been like. He goes in for surgery and come out and you get this news.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Sitting while he was in recovery for surgery. I very vividly remember this, down in the cafeteria of the hospital with my mom, and getting a call from the doctor saying, we found a mass and it's most likely cancer, but we won't know more till we run the tests. I just wanted you to be prepared that this wasn't as simple as we thought it was. And yeah,
Wow.
just bursting into tears and looking at my mom, who, was going through this stuff with my dad. And I'm like, the time my husband and I had only been together for 14 years. And I said, 14 years, it's not enough time. It's not enough time. I'm not ready for this. I don't want this.
No, absolutely. And he was 43. So that's certainly, like you said, that's before they even test. So that certainly wouldn't even be on the radar, would it?
No, his doctor, I mean, his GP and his oncologist both said, you're a zebra. In the medical profession, we're taught to look for the horse, for the most logical and explainable and thing that you're looking for. But sometimes you're a zebra and we just don't see it.
Wow. Yeah, that's not exactly the animal you want to be then, is
No,
it?
no. And he had no
Wow.
genetic factors. They did all kinds of testing because of his age and how aggressive this cancer was, to figure out what the cause was. He had no genetic factors whatsoever that would have caused this. We chalked it up to he was a smoker for a long time. He worked as a tile setter, probably without the best safety equipment around that stuff. And that as a child, he was often in a relative's dry cleaning business around those kind of
Yeah.
toxic chemicals
Toxic. Yeah.
at a
Yeah.
time when we didn't know that was what
Yeah,
was.
of course. No, of course. PPE and all of those things were not really introduced, and especially like in a dry cleaners, you wouldn't
Right.
ever, you're not going to put that a mask on a child, and right.
No.
Wow. Yeah. And I guess it would be hard for anyone to figure out exactly why he was, going through this. That's always seems to be a question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow. So, yeah. So here you and your mom are together. So, can you tell me a little bit and tell the listeners a little bit about what that process was for you and your mom?
Oh my gosh. It's one, it's one neither of us ever wanted to really be in this way. Um, but experiencing these same things at the same time brought us a lot closer together.
Mm.
We were able to lean on each other for support. We were supporting my parents as they were going through what they were going through. My mom was helping support us with mostly with our daughters. We had two daughters. One was recently graduated the year that my late husband was diagnosed, and the other graduated from high school the day after he passed.
Oh, my word. Wow. That's beyond difficult. Wow. So, yeah, that's a lot. And then, you have each other, but then you have your daughters. I didn't realize. So you have these daughters who are young watching their dad and losing their grandpa as well.
Yeah, yeah, it
Wow.
was it was an emotional roller coaster in our house for a number of years.
Yeah. So it's a lot of
Thankfully,
trauma, a lot of just getting hit with it, it sounds like.
yeah, yeah. At the same time, my company went through a complete reorganization and pulled me out from under a reporting structure I'd been in. Well, the structure the entire time I'd been in my leadership position, pulled me out, made me my own full vice president of a overseeing multiple areas, and it was great. But so that added to my stress and my grief of losing the boss that I had been working with for a decade and moving to a new boss and a new way of working. So I had that grief on top of it.
Wow. And was this during the time that your dad had passed and your husband was sick, or is this after?
It was right after my husband was diagnosed. So my father hadn't passed yet. My husband had just been
Oh
diagnosed.
my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So much. And so navigating all of this
Yeah.
and trying to work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, I mean, looking back on it, what do you think kept you quote unquote sane?
Well, during that time, it was really relying on my friends and my support network. Unfortunately, I hadn't built enough resiliency skills or stress management, anything within me. And so I started having panic attacks. Um, and it took going to therapy because I let myself get into crisis just because I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't understand that the different types of grief that I was experiencing and how they were piling up on top of each other. And, the misconceptions we have about grief, your loved one passes, you go through the ritual of having a memorial service or a funeral or celebration of life or a wake or whatever your custom is. And you think, okay, well, that's how I get closure on this grief. And now I can move on. And it isn't, it's grief is an ongoing process. You don't ever end. Like it does. It's not like, oh, grief's done, I'm gone. Like I don't.
Yeah.
And it was a surprise, right? It was a shock to me. Thankfully, I at that point I was in therapy when my husband passed. And so I had built more tools and I understood more about myself and had built my mindfulness practice to a place where I was supporting myself through a lot of the intense emotions that, those spikes of grief that come up and then disappear.
Yes, absolutely. And, our level in knowledge of grief is, I think, getting better, but we're not there yet. And so therapy, I did the same, but you're right. It's if you don't have these tools, and it's shocking, obviously, you're in this trauma and this trauma response. And of course, your body is going to start reacting. It's only natural that those things would happen. And yet, having the support of your friends. So you sought therapy. So you went through therapy. Yes. So those the kind of tools, and you're practicing mindfulness, and the knowledge is power, so to speak. So are those the kind of tools that you used during and after the losses? Were those kind of your two main ones, or was there anything else any modalities that you used?
Mindfulness was the primary, that and self-compassion work. Um, it was, there was, there's a lot of guilt that comes along with hospice and being a caregiver during hospice. So the self-compassion work that I was engaged in was critical to staying in a centered place, in a place where I could handle the emotions that were coming up and not beat myself up and make my depression and anxiety worse.
Yes. Oh gosh, you're so right that grief and guilt, they're like a married couple. Like they go hand in hand. And when I speak to clients, there is a lot of that feeling, and that's so normal. So
Mhm.
when you talk about this self-compassion, this work that you were doing, can you explain a little bit about what you mean by that? So somebody might be listening going, I mean, I kind of think I might know what she's talking about, but if you could tell us a little bit about what that actually looks like.
Sure, absolutely. Um, so there were a lot of time. I mean, when you're caring for someone who's in hospice, it is, you just want everything to be right. You want everything to be perfect for them. You don't want them to have pain. You want them to just be in a great space, but it's really challenging work, and you don't know what you're doing. You've got your hospice care team that's there to support you, but in the midst of things, you can feel like, I'm doing this wrong. I'm not, my loved one is suffering and I can't change it. I'm doing something wrong. And so it was about catching myself and catching those times when that inner critic would get loud and start telling me that I wasn't doing something perfect, or I could have done something better, or I was to blame, or it was my fault for something. And to catch when I get there, and remind myself that I'm doing the best I can with the information I have. I'm relying on my support team, and I don't have to know everything, and I don't know everything, and that's okay. That I'm human, that humans don't have endless knowledge of what they need at their fingertips all the time. And I'm not alone. And so I would reach out to my hospice team, or I would reach out to my friends who had suffered losses and talk with them. But a lot of times I just gave myself a hug, and sometimes literally just put my arms around myself to feel that hug, to know that I'm safe and I'm okay. And everything I'm going through is just for now.
Yeah. That's beautiful. It's so beautiful because it's so true. And I mean, if you're not a hospice nurse or an oncologist doctor, like you're thrown in literally head first to
To the
then
deep end.
yeah, and then to somehow know. I mean, I
Right.
experienced that with my dad. It was like the goal is to not have them be in pain, but to manage that pain. Your hospice nurse isn't living with you, and
Right.
so it's like, how much do I give? Like, what do I do? So and then that creates so much anxiety and worry, and like you said, so much, I should be doing this. Why can't I? Well, you're not a nurse, right? But you become one. So you learn very fast. And I love that you say, you have to just stop and then almost, tell yourself the truth. right? So those lies that are coming in, it's like, well, nope, shut her up, and then tell yourself the truth, and then give yourself this big hug. I love
Yep.
that.
Yep.
That is just such great advice for somebody who is listening, who is going through what you've gone through as a caretaker. I mean, I love to speak on that actually, as you're the caretaker. And so, was your husband home the whole time?
Yes, we were, and I say it this way, we were lucky enough to have him in our home the entire time. He was in a hospital bed in our living room because we had a 2-story place. And so he was in that hospital bed. And I was in our recliner next to him most of the time. You know, I slept in that chair at night because I had alarms set for the middle of the night. A lot of his medications, his pain management had to be done at very precise times. And so I would be up at 10 p.m. I'd make sure I was awake at 10 p.m. I was awake at 2 p.m. I was, just always doing that. And then I did have support from family and friends who could come over and relieve me so I could actually go lay down in a bed and get
Yes.
some good rest. But yeah, he was in our home the whole time. And I feel very fortunate for that because it gave us the space to have, and even just for me to have when he wasn't conscious, conversations
Yes.
that
Yes.
were really important to have and really gave me in particular a lot of peace of mind after his passing.
So you had these conversations together. And so you don't have to tell us all the details, but what that was like for you and being able to have these conversations with him. I'm just curious what that might look like.
So I leveraged my curiosity and I asked questions that are hard to ask, but I asked him things like, what do you see? What were your wishes for me and for your girls, for our futures, for what it looked like, for what you want for us when you're not here? And so we had real frank conversations about how he was so excited for what he saw the girls' future looking like and what he wanted them to know so that I could always say those things to the girls as we go through life without him, knowing that, yeah, no, this is really what he wanted for you because he told me. Or,
Wow.
when I am in a long-term loving committed relationship right now, and I never questioned when I felt the desire to have another relationship what he would want for me because we had those conversations.
I just got chills. I mean, that is so heartbreakingly beautiful. Like, it's heartbreaking and yet so beautiful. And thinking about what he is able to say about his wife and his daughters. So yeah. So now I'm just curious on the healing part. Your husband sadly passes away, your father has passed away. Where did you go from here? What kind of deep dives did you do? Because you said you were going to be curious. So now I'm curious what this means.
Oh my gosh. I think the biggest deep dive I did was into my identity, is to really understanding it. In fact, it drove a lot of, I went back to school before he passed. We'd been talking about me going back to school and getting another master's. And so I went back to school and I got a master's in psychology. And this idea of identity and leadership and my grief really drove a lot of my master's work around this topic because I wanted to understand what identity really was and what it meant and how do we incorporate this stuff. And it was fascinating. So I understand a lot more about all of the various identities I have and have always had and will always have to draw on.
Yes, yeah. So there's a lot of introspection, a lot of self-work, right? So
Yeah.
your own self-development and tapping into who you are, right? That's amazing. So now you go back to school, you get your master's degree in psychology. I mean, wow, and your daughters are watching mom soar in the sense of taking hold and showing them that I mean, that is amazing that, you know, while there's the grief and the pain and the heartache, that you can look inward and grab a hold of just who you are. That's a
Yeah.
great lesson for your daughters.
And I shared it with them very openly. I did not hide my grief. Yes, I cried in private sometimes, but if we were watching a show and something was going on and my grief came up, I cried. I just
Yeah.
let it cry, and they would look at it, and that gave them the space to cry when they needed it. And so we were just very vulnerable with each other, and learned to not emotionally unload or dump on each other, but how to do it in a really appropriate way, and to just, I think one of the greatest gifts that came out of that whole experience for me was really learning how to hold space for people and their pain.
Yes. Sadly, we learn that from our own experience, right? But it is something that you learn, and then you learn the value in that. So some individuals never had that while they were going through this, like the initial trauma and the initial grief. But if you have had that and you got curious and you started the mindfulness and giving yourself a hug, and you started all that self-awareness and like taking that dive into grief and what modalities can you use, you then can teach others to do the same, because they may not have those tools. They may not have that that foresight to do these things. But if you're that type of person, you can certainly teach others to do it. So I'm curious, with your, like, what do you do now? What type of work do you do now? I mean, you've got a master's in psychology. You've gone through all of this. You now tell us what you're actually doing with all of this knowledge.
So I am what I call a mindful leadership and well-being coach. And I really work with individuals on connecting to themselves, to their various identities, but really understanding their values, their beliefs, their emotions, their thoughts, and how to engage with them in a very objective way without that turning into compartmentalizing or ignoring or pushing down. But how do we deal with our inner worlds in a way that allows us to feel calm and confident in any circumstance?
And I mean,
And
you've definitely lived that. You've got you've got that t-shirt in that sense, haven't you?
Mhm.
Wow, that's amazing. So your clients, is there grief coaching as well? Do you find that your clients also are grieving losses of any kind, or?
Yes,
Okay.
because I have a deeper understanding of grief, I now see how the little things that are grief that crop up, that's what's really going on. So a lot of it, some of my clients come to me because they're feeling less confident. Turns out, oh, they left a profession they'd been in a long time and have started a new kind of career or avenue. And what they're experiencing is the grief that needs to be processed from making such a gigantic change.
Absolutely. I mean, it's new. Like, so I heard on a podcast, Amy, I think it was Mel Robbins' podcast, and Amy Porterfield was on it. And I'd never heard of her before. And I was just blown away. So now I'm a big fangirl of hers. And she
She's
said,
wonderful.
when you're doing something new, don't chase confidence, chase courage, because the confidence isn't there yet because it's brand new. So you chase the courage to take those steps, and the confidence will start to follow as you learn new things, right? And you start to
Yep.
become more confident because you know what you're doing now. So it's amazing. It is amazing. And yet, like you said, there's this grief work. And that's the thing about grief, right? That's the thing about loss, is that we sometimes only put it on, well, we've lost a loved one through death, We don't talk about divorce or parental alienation or a loss of a job or a career. And even if we made the decision in these changes, right, it's still
Yep.
grief, right?
And even if it's a positive change, right? It's something
Totally.
we work toward and we're excited about, like moving to a new home, buying a home and moving to a new city. Like you may be extremely excited about it. There's still the grief of leaving behind where you were.
Yes. And I wish I would have known that when I moved to a different country 17 years ago, that I was grieving so much before I left. And even
Yeah.
when I got here, it's just leaving your family and your friends and all of those things and the impact that that has on you and your emotions. I was so not aware, not self-aware. But I love how you did these deep dives. This is why when we spoke the first time, I was like, yes, this is my person, because this is so much like what I do. What do I need to do? What do I need to learn? What actions do I need to take? And I'm just
Yep.
going to go and I'm going to do that thing, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
if it doesn't work, that's fine. Tried it on, didn't fit. I'm going to go find something else then to do. So I love that you did that in a way that was so honoring to your children, to your late husband, to even your mother, your father, and to yourself. Absolutely powerful, very powerful. So I just know that people listening are going to resonate with many things that you've shared. And I'm so glad that we talked about the caregiver part of it. Do you have, besides what you've shared already, do you have any kind of words of advice for those who are in the thick of caring for somebody who is this anticipatory grief, this somebody we know is going to pass?
Yeah. Try your hardest not to turn away from it. Turn into
Mm,
it. The only way through it is to turn into it, not away from it. And of course, take care of yourself, which is so much easier said than done. So you have to find the small things you can do. Don't think about the stuff that you would do in your normal existence day to day for your self-care. You have to find the tiny, bare minimum things you can do and do consistently.
oh my gosh, that is so true and so good. I love it. I used to say, I'm going to go through it, not around it. But you're saying go to, turn towards it, because we
Mhm.
also know that, science tells us that this trauma and grief sit in us. And if it can manifest itself in many ways, physically, emotionally, all sorts, right? So to get
Yep.
it out of you and to work through it, turn towards it. But I love it is such good advice not to think about what you used to do. Like things are different, right? So take little incremental things
Yep.
and do that on a consistent basis.
Yep. If the only thing you can focus on one day is making sure you are drinking enough water, then make that your focus of self-care. Just make sure you're drinking enough water. That's it. Like that, you're taking care of yourself. That one little thing, and remind yourself when you're drinking the water, I'm taking care of myself right now. This is for my self-care. This is going to make me feel okay. I'm drinking water. That's good. I'm taking care of myself. Like that's it. Like that's what I'm talking about. Basic level.
That is so true. So true. I remember just saying to my daughter, like, just one thing, just do one thing today. And so she would say, call me up after she lost her fiance. She said, I took a shower today. I said, well
Uh-huh.
done. Well done.
Yep.
That's all you have to do today now.
Yep.
That's it. You've done it. And that is such important advice. I'm so, I like I said, I know that people are going to resonate, and it's such a learning podcast right now. I feel like people are going to have something to take away, something that they can quickly start to implement. into their life. So tell me, Kay, I'm going to put it in the show notes, but tell me how people can find you.
Absolutely. You can find me at my website, which is perceivingpossibilities.com. I'm also on social media on Facebook and Instagram at the same, Perceiving Possibilities, and TikTok on Grateful 365.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your wisdom, and your story with all of us. I know it's going to make a big difference in people's lives.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely.